there'll be costs, establishment costs getting paid to the contractor. Materials were ordered and are delivered. I can't tell you any specifics about the contract because it's an issue between council and the contractor, so I don't know. I do understand that the contractor has to do other work, so there'll happen a financial implication because if I were a contractor and I was expecting to do work and it's not coming, but I had the signal, I would be expecting compensation. But I can't tell you those details because that's really council, only council really knows. So I'm sure you're going to get that information later on.
Councillor Walker, please.
Just a couple of questions. Obviously, one of the significant issues going forward is the cost. You've identified that you may well make a change, and that is to have more direct involvement as compared to council. Are you in a position to recalibrate the costs around that? So that's one question. And then the other question I've got just goes to my experience with projects like this that used to occur in Rodney. For example, there was one in Warkworth where an extensive boardwalk was largely funded by the community on the basis that people bought a board. And it was remarkable how much money you were able to raise when you broke it down to a level that any number of businesses, and I'm familiar with the Rosebank Peninsula businesses, for example, might contribute. So just two quick questions there. One around recalibration of costing, and the second is around fundraising opportunities. Thanks.
So thank you. So in terms of the current issue, we can't really help for two reasons: that most funders will not fund something that's already underway. So we can help with future stages, and that's a real focus for it. But what funders have told us is, unless there's a clear commitment from council going forward, they're not interested in it. The second question about community sponsorship, that's something we're working on very hard, but it probably won't help at this stage. Our real issue is, once you decide what's going to happen, we can implement confidence to finish the project and raise the rest, help to raise the rest of the funding.
I should add that obviously the initial 4 million really came from the community via the licensing trusts themselves, but also by the two local boards. Everyone's stretched. I do sit on the Faux Local Board as a member, and we know what we're having to go to and the potential cutbacks that we're having to make anywhere. So that's a no-go zone at this stage and won't be for a while. And I will say it's no different from the local community trusts and in the licensing trusts. And we've been hammered out west with recent events, and funds are needed for really more immediate things on the ground, and therefore it's going to be hard for this project for a little while. So as Tony said, it really is the important thing is government fronting up here and council, sorry.
Can I just add to that by saying that, of course, once we've got the commitment from council to take this forward, we will go back to our community, and we do have a lot of support in the community. I keep saying that, but they will do projects like Give a Little, Fund a Board, all those sorts of projects will be able to go forward once we have some commitment to this project actually happening. And that's what we want. And we want to continue with all our plantings. Our community come along to all the plantings, and they're totally involved with the project. So I'm sure we can do some other different things to raise money. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good presentation. I've got a couple of little questions. I like things like this, and I've put them around quite a few of our harbours, and I'm deeply involved in sea cleaners, and we've cleaned a lot of the foul river up. Quite a few of your residents there aren't all that carefully with their environment already, actually, I'd have to say, which is sad. I've looked at just had a quick late entry look at the drawings. It's a very heavily designed item. It's precast concrete piles. It's pretty heavy-handed. I mean, they used to be called a boardwalk because they're made out of boards. And it's wider, it's 3 metres and 4 metres at various parts. the ones around the Bay of Islands, which are enormously popular and probably carry more. I see your numbers of people that you're expecting. There's only a cycle every 2 minutes and a pedestrian every minute, so it's not like a crowd going to Eden Park. Why is it so wide, and why wasn't it done in timber, and could that be re-examined, or is it too late?
Tony can answer the last part. Well, look, we're quite open. This is visionary. We did base it on New Plymouth, and according to Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi, I think for active transportation funds, it does help to be going wider on certain things, and you're going to have more of a case for active transportation funding to back it. We looked at timber, but timber, the bottom line is going to be half the time because this is, as you know, in the FO. The last part, a big chunk of it, over half of it, will be actually in the water. So it's a matter of going forward. How long does that timber last as compared to concrete? And so we've tried to be pretty resilient about that. That's been an important part. And just going back to New Plymouth, you can see why that has been built as strongly as it is, because it's right on the coast all the way around, and the sea is lashing it, but it stands up. It stands up totally.
Well, perhaps you should have headed north. Two things different about New Plymouth. A, it's right in the surf zone, and B, they've got an oil industry to fund those sorts of things. In terms of timber and resilience, I partly live in a house which won't meet the council's 50-year rules, but it's 118 years old in the sea. So I'd like to have another look at see if we can't. I'd love to see this. If it was 2 metres wide and made out of timber and you got it, would that be better than having 4 metres wide in concrete and not getting it?
Well, they're valid questions. We are not involved in the detailed design, so the council and Beckers are in charge of that. What I can tell you is that the resource consent conditions require a 50-year life and also have a bearing on the design standards. But to go into the detail, we're not deeply involved, so that question will be addressed through the council officers. But look, it's valid. Let's have a look at, can we do an alternative? From our point of view, we are concerned about timber and the marine environment, the potential environmental effects. But yeah, by all means, ask the officers to have a look at it with Beckers.
I wouldn't go to Beckers. I'd look to somebody that might save money rather than spend it. But Councillor Turner and then Councillor Bartley, and then we'll let you go. But thanks for a very good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's kind of basically on the back of the Mayor's comments. I'd just written down here the biggest gains are to wind the project back rather than try to go to all that fundraising possible. And I was impressed with one thing, and that is taking back your own procurement roles. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, through the Mr. So yeah, the challenge is that funding is allocated to council. So going forward, we could do that. For the current stage, that funding would need to be renegotiated and sent to the trust, which raises a whole lot of legal questions. So yeah, definitely going forward, yes, for the current situation, it's probably not possible.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and good to see you again, Ross. Remember the times you keep raising this when you're sitting around this table. So I just wanted to clarify. So you're asking us, hopefully, for additional funding. If not additional funding, you're asking us not to cancel it. That's right.
Through the chair, yes. The number one issue for us, not cancelling the project, because it really means we can't go to anyone else. So everybody told us, unless the council has a skin in the game, don't come and see us.
So you need us to keep this going so that you're able to get the funding to keep it going. And what I really appreciate about your presentation, given the kick in the guts that it could be to your community, is that you're not threatening to sue us, unlike others who've sat where you've sat. So you're wanting to work together, you're wanting to keep this going, and you're coming up with your own solutions. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. Regardless of what happens, we want to keep the environmental aspects going. regardless of what happens, because we've built up a lot of momentum. We'd love to see the FO safe for contact recreation within 10 years. So regardless of what happens, this is our commitment.
Could I just make a closing statement, if I may, please? A lot of money have gone into this project that isn't seen. The feasibility study, the design, the final design, the resource consents. And here we are sitting out spending more money on the physical pathway. I don't believe it would be correct to spend any more money on any more designs that will, it's just a waste of more money, in my own personal opinion. We've got all that and it's ready to go.
I'll take that as your personal opinion, but I can assure you I've had plenty of, I can show you lots of projects which were redesigned that saved money, but thank you for that. And thank you for your presentation, and thank councillors for their interest in it. Is anyone going to move that we receive that?
I had moved from the sidebar.
Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. I've just got to get an approval for Greg to join us, Councillor Sayers, to join us electronically. First and second in favour. Aye. Carried. Join up. I've got local board input on the same subject from the Henderson Massey board and the FO board.
FO goes first.
Marina?
I was looking for them, but there they are. Kay, there you are, and Chris, there you are.
Marina, I'm Kay Thomas,
the
chair
floor
of
is
the.
yours.
I'm Kay Thomas, chair of the FO local board. You've already heard how before the allocation of shovel-ready funding, the local board's licensing trust and Auckland Council had put significant funding into stretches of the shared path. Over time, we thought we'd see these disparate lengths of path become connected to provide a shared path from Avondale to Henderson. So we were really excited when the shovel-ready funding was allocated. Currently, there are no real connections between Newland and Henderson for cycles, and the path would provide safe networks between schools and communities and between and within our two local board areas. The path would also provide connections to the much neglected Faux River and would enable environmental initiatives to improve the health of the river and its environs. In terms of priorities, Faux Local Board would like to see the path from the Northwestern Cycleway to Roberts Field go ahead. That's in Te Atatū. Although this means connections within the Faux would be deferred until sometime in the future, we believe the total lack of safe cycling infrastructure along Te Atatū Road makes this part of the pathway a greater priority than other parts. It's a very busy two-lane road with a narrow footpath, making cycling very dangerous. We accept the council cannot currently afford to fund this pathway, but cancellation of the project means we'd have no hope for safe connections in the future. We ask that the decision about cancelling the Te Whau path is deferred until all avenues of central government funding have been fully investigated. Thank you, and over to my colleague, Chris Carter.
Thank you for that. It was from the motorway to Roberts Road, did you say?
Yes, in Te Atatū.
Right. Thank you very much, Kay, and that was very, very generous of you to set the first part of the construction in the Henderson Massey local board area. Morena, and good morning, Your Worship and councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak very briefly, because we've already spent, you've got a busy agenda and you've spent some time on this really worthwhile project. I think we can all see the logic of not killing this project off. Of course, it gets killed off if the council pulls funding. Now, sitting around the table at the moment or online are two former parliamentary colleagues, Christine Fletcher and Maurice Williamson. Both of them will know, as I know from my previous life, that you always, no matter how big your budget is, and when I was Education Minister, I had a budget of 11 billion, there's always more projects than cash. So you have to do a cost analysis and decide which are the most worthy. And this is an incredibly worthy project. Look, I think you can all see from this morning's presentation by Tony, Ross and Iris that this is the logic of this is sort of pretty compelling. If the council pulls out, it's just never going to, this project is never going to be finished. The council also throws away 35.3 million of central government funding and adds to the already huge debt burden the city has because, of course, Crown investment properties will undoubtedly have penalties around the money they've already spent. And I doubt whether there's any contingency for that in the budget already. So we'd have no pathway. We'd lose the central government 35 million and we'd add to the city's debt. Well, the logic of that is quite clear that if we can take the project forward, we should. Now, Your Worship, you said on Monday, and I thought I was really attracted to this idea, that local boards come up with a little list. I think you suggested 5. I've probably come up with 3 out here of key projects that we want. And you said, and I thought the critical thing was, okay, these are the things you want. Tell us how we can achieve them. Well, we've got a pathway for this, haven't we? We've got, first of all, in May, we've got 350 million in the government's new Transport Choices Fund, which is all about cycle and pathways. I've had a talk to Michael Wood already. While he's the decision maker, he clearly is going to professional enough not to say, I'm going to say yes, but he did say there'd be a strong case in making up some of the funding shortage from that fund. So that's a strong opportunity which may or may not eventuate. The trust led by Tony and Iris and Ross has already been a really successful fundraiser so far. And the chances of them coming up with some more money is probably quite good. I was really attracted to Councillor Walker's idea of getting the boards funded by the community. There's all those sorts of things. Those things can only happen if the project goes forward. So, Your Worship, I think what I would request is that the council doesn't pull out. It gives a conditional tick for this, but it's conditional on raising more money. So I think we should defer a final decision on this until after May, when the central government fund is available, in addition to maybe some new ideas around changing some of the design and maybe getting a bit more sponsorship. So we can't lose this project for the logic that I outlined and others have outlined today, but let's see how we can make it work. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chris Carter. I've got Councillor Watson wanting to make a speech, but I'll remind you that later on there is a confidential item to talk about this. So just ask questions about these two rather than the discussion of our decisions later. Okay.
I'll give it my best shot, Mr. Mayor. Chris and Kay, a really interesting, analysis of potential funding for the future. The question I would ask, though, in terms of the local board for a project that is such a high priority as this, has any thought been given to trading off, potentially other capital works that you're aware of? I know if it was me, I'd be looking to keep this going and, perhaps willing to come and go on something else. Has there been any thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, we have actually. We've got a bit of transit money, which was compensation for the extraordinary amount of time that was spent in widening Te Atatu Road. So we would use some of that funds, but it would be less than $1 million. And certainly if we can find any cash from our capital works program that's spare, and there is a possibility of something less than $1 million, we'll certainly be throwing it into this project.
And we don't have any significant capital works that we can defer. Ollie has been deferred for us by the funding shortfalls, and so we're just not in a position. We have already given significant funding to this over the last few years.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Henderson and Councillor Leone have moved and seconded the acceptance of this. Please, all those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much for your presentation. The next item is extraordinary items, of which there are none that are known. And so we'll move to the Chief Executive and Group Chief Financial Officers updates. Mr. Stevick and Mr. Gudstall and Mr. Blick, who is online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And good morning, councillors. Could I first of all start on behalf of the staff of the Auckland Council Group with an acknowledgement of the many Aucklanders who have been impacted by the floods of the 27th of January and the cyclone Gabriel. The impact has obviously been devastating for many, and our thoughts are with them, and our continued efforts will be applied in support of the many Aucklanders who have been impacted. In my update this morning, there will be an understandable focus on where our effort and attention has been over the last month. Obviously, I'll spend some time talking about the work that we've done in support of responding to the impact of the flood and the cyclone. But first of all, I want to cover our response to the government reform agenda, or our position on the government reform agenda, in three parts. Firstly, the water reform agenda. By way of update, the Water Services Entities Act 2022 was passed in December and set up the 4 entities across New Zealand, and then in December, the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee called for submissions on the Water Services Legislation Bill and the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. Auckland Council has an extension to provide our submissions to that committee by the 24th of February. The draft submission is on today's governing body agenda. We continue to respond to requests for information from DIA's National Transition Unit. As they gear up, the N2U People and Workforce Workstream have been working to determine which functions and positions are likely to transition to the new water services entity, in our case, Entity A. There will be more certainty in mid-March around that certainty will allow the NTU to begin the consultation process with affected staff. And of course, as matters stand, that is water care staff and what we understand as what we call Healthy Waters, our stormwater management team. The second part of the reform agenda is in relation to the future for local government work. The Auckland Council submission on that, again, is part of the governing body agenda for today, and the Council will lodge its submission in relation to the draft report by the 28th of February. And then thirdly, in relation to the resource management system reform, the Spatial Planning Bill, Natural and Built Environment Bill are now before the Environment Select Committee. Council lodged 2 submissions and presented to the Select Committee in the middle of February, arguing that the proposed independent regional planning committees will create fragmented governance and coordination problems, and that climate change is not sufficiently front and centre of the reforms. We have offered to work with the Select Committee and officials to support the design of bespoke arrangements for Auckland. The Climate Adaptation Act is expected in the next few months. The legislation will introduce the legal framework for managed retreat. Without a clear understanding of the scope of the Act, it's difficult to anticipate how the 3 acts will work together and how the reforms will reduce emissions and effectively address the impacts of climate change. Transition to the new system will happen in stages and is expected to take several years. The National Planning Framework is expected to be released for public consultation in October to December 2023. And obviously that conversation is very much front of mind for many in New Zealand. I do want to comment on the work we've been doing in support of our response to the flood and the cyclone challenges. The experience of the 27th of January and the following cyclone will bring a lot of focus and attention to the reform agenda generally. The significant and devastating events will require a rethink or an acceleration of programs of work on land use and planning, managed retreat, adaptation approaches and regulatory settings. The February Planning, Environment and Parks Committee has commissioned work to be done in these areas to identify the improvements required across policy, settings and the unitary plan and Plan Change 78. Understanding how we build back better by building in resilience and adaptation in everything we do will be important. We will also work with central government and other agencies as we move from response to recovery. The Civil Defence and Emergency Management Committee meet today to appoint an interim recovery manager, and recovery will be an important focus of our agenda for some time to come. While we can see for ourselves the devastating impacts on people, communities, land and infrastructure around Tamaki Makaurau, there are also many stories of strength. I want to thank the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, all of our elected members, community and business leaders, iwi and Matawaka, FENS, police, the Defence Force and Red Cross, a range of NGOs, NEMA, Met Service and central government partners for the collective effort required to respond to the storm and cyclone. There are many hands shaping this response and many we will need to acknowledge in time, and many are needed to shape and deliver on our recovery. As I visited the CDCs and shelters or talked with our people on the ground, I'm incredibly proud of our people and the work that they've done in support of Aucklanders. Of course, given the extent of the impact of the flood and the cyclone, our response will never feel like enough. But I can assure you that our people have been incredibly committed. Over 2,000 staff have been volunteering and working across a range of support activities. A couple of examples from the catering team. From midnight on the 27th of January, the team was delivering the first meals to evacuated people at the Kelston hub by 2 a.m. Since then, they've delivered over 28,000 meals to shelters and CDCs and the Emergency Management Centre. Tava and the distribution team have been supporting logistics essential supplies like food, toiletries, PPE, water, pet food to CDCs, and after the cyclone, moved to working with the Defence Force on aerial drops to isolated communities out west, delivering 200 packs per day to each of the 9 isolated areas, as well as generators, extension cords, 400 litres of water and 91 petrol and diesel every day. At the peak of our response, Ian McCormick and a team of 160 building inspectors delivered the rapid building assessments. As of Tuesday this week, we've carried out nearly 5,500 assessments for the Auckland storm event and another 1,360 for the impacts of Cyclone Gabrielle on affected Auckland properties. We're now also following up with welfare visits to stickered sites with staff alongside the Red Cross. The waste management team and the council waste contractors provided hundreds of skip bins across Auckland with support of the Defence Force and many councillors, including the Mayor. We moved household items from the curbside into skip bins before the cyclone hit. Thousands of tonnes of damaged household items and waste have been disposed of through the Auckland Council waste transfer stations and 14 other public and private stations supporting the safe removal of items. Ross Roberts, our geotech expert, and other trusted specialists in that field are working in the most impacted zones and sharing their knowledge with communities so that they have the context for what was happening. Our Community Facilities and Parks team have managed 3,500 tree-related requests. That's over a quarter of what we receive in a year. Welfare calls are an essential part of supporting our people alongside on-the-ground activities, and we've deployed a team of approximately 40 council staff and partner agencies into AEM for welfare calls that we've set up, and information hubs in some of our libraries to support local communities. On average, we had over 160 people every day in the Emergency Coordination Centre, Many of those were council staff, but many of them were not. People you will recognise well: Phil Wilson, Paul Amaral, the now famous Rachel Kelleher, Mace Ward, Fleur Aldridge, Andrew Clark, Adam Maggs, Nick Tudoa. Many, many more have been our bench strength as the core ATM team alongside the Public Information Management Desk and the services that we provide. As the focus moves to our regional neighbours, of course, we have to support MBIE's mobilisation to support other councils. We're sending building inspectors to Kaipara, to Waikato, and we're on standby to provide building inspectors to the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, the Gisborne district. It's obviously been the focus of our attention for the last month, but we're also focused on progressing everything else we've got to do, including the budget. And so it's been a busy time, but I just want to acknowledge the efforts of our council staff and thank councillors and elected members for their support in our endeavours. I do want to invite Gary Blick, the Chief Economist, to share a few thoughts on the broader economic impacts of the weather events before we move on to Peter. So Gary, I'm hoping you're online.
Thank you, Jim. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou and good morning, everyone. I'd just like to offer 3 points about the nature of the impacts of the severe weather events, if I can, from an economic perspective. Firstly, perhaps it's useful to distinguish between the direct impacts and the indirect. The direct impacts being those that affect the stock or damage the stock of human capital, such as loss of life, as well as physical capital owned by Auckland households, businesses and the public sector. And of course, that damage covers people's homes, land, household contents and vehicles, as well as damage to business inventories and equipment and crops, as well as the infrastructure networks. And of course, the indirect impacts, on the other hand, are the disruptions to the flow of economic activity caused by the damage to those assets, such as business closures, disruptions to the movement of people and supply chains, and to the visitor economy. The second point I'd like to offer is that the potential for a surge in the flow of economic activity in the wake of these weather events comes with an opportunity cost. Of course, some types of activity will increase in the aftermath relating to the cleanup, remediation and replacement of these damaged assets. But any post-event lift in GDP may just reflect activity to remediate the damaged asset base, in effect just building back to where we were. And of course, the repair of infrastructure and housing will place pressure on a construction industry that's already facing capacity constraints. So this raises the prospect of repair work being drawn out and limited resources such as labour and materials being diverted from alternate uses. And so that's the opportunity cost that the other planned infrastructure projects that might have been next in the queue, some of those will be delayed. And together this increase in demand will add to inflationary pressures. So the Reserve Bank has offered a view yesterday when it offered its official cash rate announcement that inflation is potentially going to be higher for longer and possibly a longer period of CPI being above 7%, noting that it's currently at 7.2%. And some of that pressure will of course come through the construction sector as well as on specific goods that will be in shorter supply, including fruit and vegetables, cars and appliances. The third point I'd like to offer is about the distribution of these impacts, in particular the potential for flood events to exacerbate existing socioeconomic inequalities. Natural hazard risk, including flood risk, is to some extent already priced into land, and locations with lower land values are often more affordable for lower income households. In particular, households on floodplains are not only more exposed to flood risk if they've got an opportunity to locate there because of the lower land price, but also perhaps may have fewer resources to cope with flood events and impacts. So we're undertaking some analysis to try and understand the socioeconomic characteristics of those local neighbourhoods where damage occurred, and that involves us, council staff working with government agencies to share data and form a better picture of the economic resilience of some of those households, in particular their incomes, home ownership status, insurance status, and the extent to which they're already reliant on government services. And that information may be something we can bring to you to inform your understanding of the impacts as well as to inform the recovery phase. So thank you for the opportunity to offer those comments.
Thank you very much. Very well said, but rather bleak.
Thank you, Gary. If I could impose on your holiday a bit longer and ask you to stay online for any follow-up questions, that would be appreciated.
Certainly, Peter.
If I could now, thank you. If I could now brief the councillors on some financial information. So on 8th of February, some information on the potential financial implications in response to the January 27 storm event were included in a memo to elected members, and that was discussed with the governing body at a workshop on the 10th of February as well. The response included the potential need to reprioritise capital investment to address urgent asset renewals and a proposal for a storm response fund. That has since been agreed by the governing body for inclusion in the draft annual budget consultation document and supporting information. As you know, finance staff from across the group are still compiling costs related to that response and recovery activity, as well as some substantial costs relating to repairing and renewing assets damaged by the storm and subsequent cyclone. While too early to assess the full scale of costs, a subsequent memo was provided this week, providing an update on the nature of the financial impacts across the group following that January 27 associated storm events. Staff have also signalled issues that will need to be considered as part of the next 10-year budget in response to the need to make Auckland more resilient to the impacts of extreme weather and to address the funding to remedy medium to longer term impacts on the water and transport infrastructure networks. Council staff are also working with NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, and MSD, who have confirmed some costs, including accommodation and food supplies, may be recovered through them. The process to make claims is being coordinated centrally, and all entities in the group will be able to submit claims for eligible expenses incurred. Our insurance team is compiling information on claimable costs related to both the storm and cyclone, and this will take some time to fully complete. The level of claims, as well as the impact on the self-insurance fund, has not yet been quantified, but it is very likely there will be an adverse financial impact on the self-insurance fund. Staff will continue to gather information across the group to refine the full cost impact of the storm events and expect our next update to provide broad ranges of financial impact for your information. The latest memo to councillors from myself contains some examples of the operational and capital impacts across the group. I'll just mention a few of those now. For Auckland Council, urgent remedial works through stormwater maintenance contractors, cleaning and repair works of facilities. For Auckland Transport, roading, rural sealed and unsealed repairs, damage to traffic lights, culverts, etc. Water care, network reactive renewals such as pump repairs and treatment plants. Tataki Auckland Unlimited, cleaning of facilities and venues, emergency management and support. Eki Panuku, repair and maintenance costs across commercial and residential properties damaged by the storm. Now, as I move off this item, I would like to reinforce that Council does have the short and medium term financial ability and strength to both respond and recover to these events. So the remedies that we have were set out in an initial memo. They are the ones that you see in the consultation document and in previous long-term plans. In this case, they include debt, capital prioritisation, insurance and rates, normal and potentially abnormal government support, including reimbursement and sharing of repair costs. So I do want to make that point because it's a very black hat analysis when I'm talking purely about the impacts. If I go now to financial performance, as noted in the very fulsome footnote in the report on your agenda, we have the NZX disclosure obligations relating to the half-year results. So the January 23 performance report will be provided to the governing body via memo once the final half-year NZX release is released to the NZX and the public on Tuesday, 28th of February 2023. The draft report did go to all members of the Audit and Risk Committee last week and was tabled and worked through this week, so it's close to going. If I could make some key points around economic market activity and some of the key assumptions that underpin our budget to see how they are currently moving. Our annual inflation rate, the CPI, was 7.2% at the end of December. That's updated quarterly. Does have some implications for staff costs, but is largely in line with the previous projections and will have limited impacts on our financial projections for the annual budget. I would refer back to our independent chief economist's view on what the impact of those storm events could be, and we really are uncertain around the impact on that inflation rate at this point. Unemployment, 3.5%. GDP was growth to the end of September was 0.5%. Our consented numbers were 21,301 for the year ended December, 4% higher than the year previously. And as we were all watching with interest yesterday, or perhaps not with interest, but concern, the current OCR has moved to 4.75%. Now, since yesterday afternoon and noticing that 4.75%, it was broadly in line with market expectations and advisors. It does not particularly change our view of the forward path for inflation and interest. So while it might look, as we said in our 8th February memo, that the outlook for inflation and interest might not be as bad as it was looking late last year, the forecasts are still high and remain very uncertain. So that's a quick update on some of the key drivers and assumptions within our financial projections. For the annual budget 23-24, governing body has adopted the consultation document for that annual budget, and public consultation will be open from midday on the 28th of February and will continue for a month. So thank you for listening. I'll now pass you back to the chair.
Thank you for that presentation from both of you. Are there any questions? I've got Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. So one of them about staff wellbeing and one of them about finances. So I'll go staff first with Jim. So, just briefly, I've witnessed firsthand some of the huge work and huge hours that our staff have been putting in, accountants filling sandbags and all that kind of thing. And we appreciate it so much, both as a body and as a city, all the work they're doing. But I just kind of want your assurance that we're taking care of their health and well-being and their physical and mental health with the amount of hours they're pulling and the amount of sad stories they hear at these CDCs and others.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor, and thank you for the acknowledgement of the work that many people are doing, including staffing shelters and civil defence centres overnight under pretty difficult circumstances. Lots of different things that people have been involved in that are very different to their day jobs. And yes, we are doing everything we can. You have my assurance that we're doing everything we can to support our people to make sure they get the opportunity to take a break from some of the work they've been involved in, to make sure that they have access to all of the support services and are reminded to take advantage of them, and in some cases encouraged to take advantage of those services. And it is very much a kind of case-by-case basis, right? We have to work with our team of individuals to make sure that they're getting the support they need, but you have my assurance that that's happening.
Thank you, that's wonderful. A question on finances, Peter. So in the rebuild after this storm and cyclone, we're going to have to renew assets, repair them, replace them. One of the things that we used to do a lot in local board, for example, is when playgrounds are getting tired and they need a renewal, we would choose that as the moment to actually upgrade it at the same time. So it's a one dig kind of philosophy. Do we have flexibility in the organisation for, for example, we need to renew a road and we were planning to put a cycleway there anyway. When we're digging up the road, we chuck it all in at once. The one dig philosophy approach. Do we have the flexibility for that?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure that that's a financial question as much as an operational one, which I'd hate to answer. However, if I do turn it to the financial, as we rebuild and respond and recover to these events, much like I saw in the Christchurch recovery period, you want to do as much alignment as you can. It coordination effort for that. However, you need to be mindful of the best spend for that renewal money, which is why we've signalled within the long-term plan the need for that reprioritisation. So I'm afraid I haven't answered it fully, other than that we will need to be mindful of the scale and that we get the best bang for the buck for every dollar we spend.
Yeah, I mean, there's potential cost savings there if we can identify it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. My question is quite a good follow-on from Councillor Henderson's, actually. Councillors around the table will probably be familiar with some of the quite scary financial graphs we've been looking at in the last few years around future consequential OPEX and renewal costs. And this is similar to a question really that I've been asking Auckland Transport in this building back phase. Are we taking opportunities to look at, is this asset in the right place? Is this what we actually need with some of the legacy assets? And really wanting some assurance, I guess, that as we go through that process, we're communicating really clearly with the community about, we've patched this because we need to think about whether this is in the right place. And also how local boards are going to be involved in those processes, because a lot of these assets actually sit with them, particularly in the parks space and community facilities. Thanks.
That's quite a big question, but a really relevant one. Thanks, Councillor. And we are having a conversation this afternoon in a subsequent meeting about the subject of recovery. I think one of the themes of recovery is exactly that question. Where do we need to apply our recovery effort from an investment point of view? Can we afford to repair everything or replace everything? Or if we have to be more selective, how do we make those choices? And then in making those choices, how do we involve the community through local boards in getting the choices right? As we sit here, I don't have a better answer for you than that, other than to acknowledge that I agree that needs to be a very important part of the conversation, because inevitably, we will have to make some choices.
Thank you. Just to quickly follow up on that, I think we do need to think, it is a longer term conversation, but I think in the short to medium term, we need to be thinking about some of the comms. So I would just encourage staff to maybe take that on, acknowledging it will be a longer conversation. So not sure if you have any thoughts in that space, trying to turn it into a question. Sorry, Mayor.
No, it's a good question, and it will be, again, like what we learned from Christchurch. There's a lot of decisions about what you do repair and what you don't. I'm actually meeting this evening with insurance companies and leaders, spokespersons, because they are another player in this, because there will be a certain number of things that they will not insure afterwards. And that is a very big impost on what you decide to repair and not repair. It's a very complex question. It will occupy a front of mind for several months. Regular discussions with the Prime Minister over these, because he's really facing it. Just when we thought we had a hard one, he's got her on steroids. Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. Question for you, Jim. I'm sure I speak for everyone around the table when we thank our staff for what they have done outside their day jobs, for want of a better word, and turned that into night jobs and day jobs all put into one. What is the best way for us to thank them, noting that we only employ one person, which is you? How can we say thank you? Because I'm sure I don't speak alone. I think we're all very grateful.
Deputy Mayor, thanks for the question. I'd like to take the question on notice and come back to you with some thoughts on that. Clearly, the people who have responded to the demands that we've had, or the expectations or the requirements that we've had to respond to Aucklanders, have done it because they care about Aucklanders. And I suspect the first thing they would appreciate is just the acknowledgement that that's not, that that's recognised. But I would like to take your question on notice and come back to you and the council with some thoughts on that.
I think that's a very good question, Deputy Mayor, and it's probably one we all could ask as well. And I imagine that all around the room we're all feeling a bit knackered, to be quite honest. Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I think my question is directed to the Chief Executive more than anything. I, having had a lot of experience through central government, can remember just so many disasters occurring. The stock exchange collapse in 87, the global financial crisis in 2008, but the Asian financial crisis in the middle of the 90s and the Canterbury earthquake, I can give you a list of them. And the one common factor I heard from ministers and Treasury and others after them all was I wish we'd put the brakes on discretionary stuff, because we've closed off a lot of avenues for the recovery by not having stopped some of the spending that could have been. And I've seen things from AT making announcements ever since this council was elected of big sums of money going into what are definitely discretionary. And I'm just going to check, is there something going out to all budget holding departments and of council and to all of the CCO, chief executives and chief financial officers for them to rapidly shove a brake on everything at this point? Not to stop it in terms of what goes on, but I've only ever heard the sort of reluctant comments afterwards, I wish we'd acted sooner on putting on the brakes. I've never heard any time ever, well, we slammed them on too hard and I wish we hadn't been so tough. And I would really like to see that we do that right through the organisation and the CCOs. Thank you, Councillor. If I respond to it as a question, there's been no explicit instruction to do anything different at this stage, although I would note that the council and every CCO is currently under pretty significant pressure to put the brakes on everything anyway in order to meet our budget commitments and get the run rate into the shape that we need it to be to meet the challenges that we've got in front of us for next year. So putting the brakes on harder, I think will require some political discussions around where we want the impact of those things to be felt. And I expect that we're going to have to bring those things to the table pretty soon to be able to make the right judgments. Just was more concerned as not to do with anything of that's gone and we're not going to fund it or anything, but just to say, just hi-ho for this until we are sure of where we are. And then we can come back with a better list and a lot more discretion about what we do, rebuild or repair or throw out. Because the longer we don't put the brakes on, the less discretion we will have with regards to what it is we're wanting to achieve out of it.
Very good point, thank you. I'm sure that that's going to be noted. Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you. Jim, thank you for your report and thank you for your leadership. And Desley has asked my question, so I just have one for Peter. It's actually related to the annual plan, but comes on the back of your discussion around interest rates. So in the supporting documentation, we've got the projection in the 10-year plan of interest rates, and they go from 4.6 to 4.9. I've met with some people in terms of the consultation, and they have heard that interest rates from councillors could hit 7%, which makes quite a difference. So should we councillors who are going to be going, or everyone actually who's going to go out and consult, have a refresh of a stab at those projections if they're going to be going from 4.6 up to 7%, because people are making a decision around their selling of the airport shares or whatever it may be based on that advice coming from councillors. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Without having that detail in front of me, I suspect the difference is that we have 80% of our debt hedged and it only rolls off over time. $1 billion, $1.5 billion a year is what we tend to renew. So the impacts of those high interest rates come through over time, and then they are then matched with the expectations on what we're seeing out in the market and what OCR is driving. When we look at the OCR impact from yesterday, and I do have to say that we've had, just a tiny amount of hours to look at it. It doesn't appear to change our out-year projections for that weighted average of the cost of debt for us. So we are okay, but we are nervous.
Thank you. That was my interpretation. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for that. We are fairly heavily hedged, which is an important issue. Councillor Sayers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to acknowledge the update from Mr. Stabak around the immediate impacts from 27th of January. So thank you for that, and Peter's elaboration on the reprioritisations, and particularly Peter, your words around our ability to be able to respond to that. So thank you for that. The question just goes to the recommendations. Particularly A2, just realising that today's meeting's, ahead of that release next week to the NZX. So, Peter, are you in a position to comment to us as a committee around the statement of revenue and expenditure, and specifically around the employee benefits expense line, realising this is, a historical report, and if that was for the group, if we were above or below budget there for the group, and if we were above or below for the Auckland Council parent, and if we were, are you able to provide any reasonings to us today?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Sayers. The footnote on the report really does talk to my inability to go into any detail at this time. However, that information will be fully available when we release the December results, and we can follow it up. As it's a key line, the differences and variances in there are clearly explained. But I am quite keen for myself and councillors as Dean Directors to avoid fines and prison terms at this time.
Okay, I'll wait for it, Peter. Probably just to follow on, just to you as the mover and the Deputy Mayor as the seconder, and in light of Councillor Morrison's comments around the idea of looking at the discretionary expenditure, Mr. Mayor, is that something that you might want to just consider as part of today's resolution to be added? I'll just put that to you as a rhetorical question rather than you have to answer now, but it might be an appropriate time to have that included for your thought. So thank you.
Are you awaiting a response for that, or?
Oh yeah, well, no, rather than me having to move an amendment, Your Worship, is this something that you think is appropriate for today to add the hold to the putting out a directive to the Chief Executive and CFOs about a hold on discretionary spending?
But perhaps if I could respond in the first instance, Mayor Wayne, and through you, Chair. This to me is something that was picked up at the Expenditure Control Committee and something that we can bring back to the Expenditure Control Committee. It would be along the lines of defining discretionary spend, options for managing or controlling discretionary spend, and any implications of stopping or limiting such spend. So I think it more appropriately fits with the discussion with yourself, Councillor Sayers as Deputy Chair, and with Councillor Williamson as Chair to perform that work, particularly given the aspects that I think we've already talked about. The brakes are already fairly well tuned and being pressed at this time.
Yeah, that's a reasonable response. I think the flavour is out there in the air, and I'm sure Mr. Gudsall's picking it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I get to my question, I want to respond to some comments that people have already made. Some of the people that were staffing the evacuation centre that I was based at work in our communities teams, the teams that are on the ground in the communities. So a way that we could thank them is to not cut their jobs. In terms of the other comment that was made regarding discretionary spending, I think we need to keep that going because we're in a natural disaster state of emergency. We're in a
to be over and above itself. Staff and all the rest of it, and the CEOs expensive. Directly politically accountable may not be aware of the absolute need for us to get our spending under control and to be able to deal with the aftermath of these extreme weather events in a financially rigorous way. So I would seek your permission, Mr. Mayor, to move an addendum to the resolution along those lines.
Is there a seconder for that?
Yeah, could I just ask that we take a short break to consider what we might craft?
I can give a copy of what I had drafted up, and then could be the basis of what you would want to take. I mean, it's not a perfect set of wording, but it's as good as I could get. That gave a direction to everybody to just we'll just hold back until we know.
Yeah.
But you can take these words and maybe modify them.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute toilet break in here, and meanwhile, we'll just see what we can do.
Very good, Mike. Way to go.
That's a recommendation.
Okay, I'll send them out to you guys. Oh, this is tough. This is tough.
It's, it was moved by Councillor Walker and seconded by Councillor Morrison, and it will go up in a moment when the electronic whizzes manage to do this. I beg your pardon?
Happy to speak to it in the interim. I'm not constrained by technology.
Or even impact that.
Are we able to ask some questions once we see what?
But just the proposer will speak to what's coming, and you're welcome to ask questions. But from what I've seen of it, it's supportive but not benign. Here we are. The council notes the financial situation facing the council in light of the forecast $295 million operating budget shortfall and recent severe weather events and ongoing economic uncertainty, encourages the chief executive, local boards and local council organisations to closely scrutinise and manage any spending and where possible consider stopping or limiting new discretionary spending. There is. Request staff to report back to the next meeting Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee on defining the scope of discretionary spend, options for managing or controlling discretionary spend and any implications of stopping or limiting such spend. I think that's quite a sensible series of statements. It probably doesn't do much more than encourage the behaviour which is already there. Councillor Walker will speak to it, and then I have Councillor Hills and Councillor Ferry, I believe.
Entirely supportive. This council needs to be on a war footing in private organisations that I've been involved with where there's been a necessity for a cut or a freeze. A memo would go out to every member of staff across the organisation, because generally everyone is involved everywhere and everyone can take a measure of responsibility. So I would hope that that is the type of message that goes out, which is somewhat more than simply encouragement. Everyone across our organisation needs to be informed. Just as an aside, as much and all as we've had a cyclone, all of the requirements for a cyclone still exist. We're in that season. They form. The ocean temperatures continue to be warm, and they are forming. So as much and all as we are responding to something now, we could be responding again. So I have a real concern that this organisation goes on an appropriate performance so that it can both respond now but also is prepared. And as the Mayor has said, and we all know, we have an immensely tight budget already. And these words are entirely modest in my opinion. So thank you.
Councillor Hills.
Well, nothing what Councillor Walker said actually says what's up there. So I'd just like to ask some questions. What exactly is discretionary spending? What is the definition? Who's defining that? Because that was the issue at the Expenditure and Control Committee, and that's why it didn't end up on the table. So who's defining that? What does that mean? Staff are going to be scratching their heads because they're already doing this for months, if not years, with COVID. So what does this mean?
I think item C addresses that, if you'd like to read it.
No, I guess I was asking the mover, Mr. Chair, Mayor, sorry. Could I please have the mover define what discretionary is? What are staff reacting to when you ask them this?
I mean, I'm sure any of us can look up the standard Webster dictionary and you'll get a delineation of what discretionary means. I don't have it on me, but I think officers know that they have discretion within their budgets. But the critical thing is the message here, that things are tight, that we need to build back better. That's self-evident. And
Councillor Walker,
as Mr. Morrison said, we need to tie-ho. You asked me to respond and I'm responding.
You're not answering the question. I just would like to know what we're voting on. What is discretionary spending?
There.
What is the...
Up there.
It's there. So could I ask another question?
Item C quite clearly says to request to put that on the defining the scope of discretionary.
So,
I'm going to rule you out for talking. Carry on. That's nonsense.
Okay. This goes to then another committee, but was the over $1 million we've spent removing people's waste off berms counted as discretionary? That wasn't budgeted?
I'm not answering that question.
Well, this is an encouragement, and it is to be seen in that regard. I don't think it's anything particularly new, but Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. My question is similar to Councillor Hill's, but perhaps we could think about the services prioritisation framework in terms of where we think discretionary sits. So for some people, discretionary might be anything that is not a must. So that would potentially include a should, could, won't. We're still going through a whole lot of processes around trying to work out what should fall in should, could, won't. And I'm really concerned that we are all bringing different definitions of discretionary spending to this resolution, and that some of us will think that it's just the must, and some of us will think it's must, should, could, and then we're having an active argument over some of the could and won't at the moment for the forthcoming budget. So I'm at this point not comfortable with how this sits at all. And just harking back to what Councillor Bartley said, discretionary spending, it's often people's jobs. Thank you.
Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you. To either Jim or Peter, we would have no idea of the unintended consequences of this either, would we? And if we look at Councillor Hill's example, that was a discretionary spend that was actually needed at that time. I'm not comfortable. Well, first of all, letter D, it says it's going to come back as discretionary spend, but we're asking to vote on it now without actually knowing what it is. What are the possible unintended consequences, not just for council, across the CCOs?
So I think, not wanting to circumvent the debate, but the same challenge emerged, I think, through the conversation of the Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee, in that there is a piece of work required to define the scope of what we mean by discretionary spend and what choices we could make, how we control it, and the implications of stopping that spend. We're not proposing, I don't think you're proposing in this amendment that we do anything other than define what we mean by it and understand the implications and make a recommendation as to how we manage it. I would, though, simply say that right across the organisation, we are, as I've said a couple of times, we are absolutely applying the brakes to any choices that we've got where it makes sense, any choices that we've got so that we can slow down our run rate to get to a place where we can meet our budget commitment for next year. This is a question of, can we apply the brakes harder on some things? And if we can, what are they and what are the implications of it?
Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question and my comments are along the same lines, and I'm really mindful that if the discretionary spending that people are talking about means the flexible spending, the flexible way that we've been able to see our board and our council group across the whole council group respond during the flood and during the cyclone, then I would not support cutting that or stopping that or encouraging the stopping of having that discretionary funding, because what we saw on the ground is that flexibility is what enabled us to respond as nimbly as we were able to the flood and to the cyclone. For sure, I know that our PPE gear that we got from Tava for our cleanup response in Mangere would not have been able to happen without that discretionary funding. And I put, inverted speech marks around the word discretionary there because we don't know what that quite means. So I'm just really uncomfortable here in the same way that others are around the room, because I think it may mean, and I don't know if that's really the intention of the mover and the seconder, but I think in reality, what it may mean is that we just simply wouldn't have that flexibility and that ability to respond when something really unexpected happens in the way that we've been able to on the ground in my experience. Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. That's a new discretionary spending, and I think they're probably talking about other things, but still. Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. I strongly support this, and I think we're overthinking it. Yesterday, I walked into my small business I've had for 40 years with 5.5 staff, and I said, hey guys, we've dipped back into overdraft. The workbook looks empty. Cut all discretionary spending. Share some short weeks if you have to. You know what we're in. You know what we have to do. You know, we're all in this together. Thank you very much. And I walked out. They knew what I meant. I knew what they were going to do. We're just having a stiff reminder. Thank you.
Councillor Lee, and thank you, Councillor Turner.
Thank you. And I'm sure Councillor Turner's staff, I'm sure Councillor Turner didn't add when he gave that order to say, and work out in a month's time what discretionary spending actually is, because I'm not sure what it actually is. And that's what we're doing here, unfortunately. With all due respect, this is just, in the circumstances, this is just too weak. Notes the financial situation facing council. Well, it's a grave financial situation for a start. Encourages the chief executive, local boards and council controlled organisations. You encourage people to go and exercise. You know, this is a serious situation. Councillor Williamson's draft resolutions uses the words directs. Now, I think encourages it's too weak, and where possible, consider. Again, the intent has been weakened, and finally, the killer blow. Request staff to come back and tell us what discretionary spending is in a month's time. That's not closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. That's shooing the horse out the door first and then closing it. And so I really do think that we need to tighten up the wording. We need to tighten up the wording here. Otherwise, it looks all a bit hollow. And I can tell you that the CCOs in particular will read the tea leaves, will read between the lines, and they'll know that this is not that serious. And therefore, I think we need to tighten up the wording and to make sure that our intent is perfectly clear and that we are serious about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to make it clear, the governing body doesn't have the power to direct, but we can certainly encourage. And I think you're dead right. Andy Baker.
Thank you, Bishop. So at the risk of upsetting my learned colleagues over there, I certainly won't be supporting it. I just find it absolutely a waste of time, to be fair, and a little bit insulting. I mean, I had over 12 years. I actually trust our guys that with our staff actually know that the situation we're in, and don't need us to keep telling them, and so. I'm more than happy I'll be voting against it. I don't see the point. I think it's a waste of time even discussing it, and that we should actually just be concentrating on what we need to concentrate on. And if you want to know what discretionary is, go and spend some time at a local board who spend more time talking about their discretionary budget, because the only thing they can talk about, and we're talking it to them, saying to them, just put a hold on it, and what that does for our communities. So if we apply it to them, we apply it to ourselves and all our little pet projects.
Councillor Newman.
Within the annual plan, the long-term plan, we understand what the CapEx lines are. They are defined, they have been agreed. They are not discretionary. We understand what the consequential OPEX lines are. They are agreed, they are funded. They are not discretionary. In response to a civil defence emergency, The budget is spent for a civil defence emergency response. It's required because we have to do it. We have national legislation around civil defence emergency management, which requires that response. It will be something that is resourced. Sometimes that will have to be funded retrospectively, actually, in order to ensure that we can build back as part of a recovery effort. I don't think that's discretionary. There are other budget lines that we currently do not have full disclosure to. The look through into the budget is not that obvious. Hopefully it will become more obvious. I'm pretty clear as to what is not discretionary insofar as CapEx and the consequential OpEx for that. I actually think that we don't spend enough consequential OpEx on renewal of our assets, and when we do want to renew assets, people want to spend that money differently on things for which it's not a renewal, it's a cycleway. But that's a whole different debate, Chair. I think that I do think that the amendments are not as clear as they could be insofar as the definition. It would be good to have more clarity on this. It will come back to that particular committee, but I don't see what there isn't going to be a breakdown in the capacity of the organisation to spend if we pass this resolution. So I do hope that the Chief Executive can address in short time what Councillor Williamson has been requesting insofar as the understanding of the other operating cost lines are, because that would be very helpful to allow that committee to undertake the work for which it has been mandated.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. Resolutions need to be read in the abstract in and of themselves and need to be very clear so that we can apply them. I've got a number of issues with this resolution, one of which is being directed to look at the Webster Dictionary definition of what discretionary is, and I actually did that, and it says left to individual choice or judgment, which basically applies to every single council decision we ever make. I think Councillor Ferry made a fantastic point around the prioritisation matrix, which deals with D fairly well. We actually have done a lot of the work that D has required us to do already. Finally, my issue is that, it's ultra vires of us to tell local boards what to do through this mechanism, and I'm not comfortable with that either. So for that reason, I'm out.
Councillor Watson.
I wouldn't classify this resolution as a waste of time, Mr. Mayor. If I look at the actual wording and you judge your decision on what's actually written down, we're noting the financial situation, 295 million operational budget shortfall at the last time we looked. Goodness knows what the next one will be. We're over $11 billion in debt. We've had severe weather events that have brought up any number of additional costs, which to this point remain unquantified. We have rising costs in the economy as a whole, etc., etc. So I would say that that is a pretty dire situation by any stretch or any definition, Webster Dictionary, Oxford aside. What is our response? To encourage as the Chief Executive. I wouldn't say encourage is the strongest verb in the world. Encourage. I don't think the police, encourage people not to commit crime. They tell people not to commit crime. So that's an incredibly limp verb to be using as a starting point from where I'm sitting, given the circumstances that we all know that we're facing. Someone talked about the abstract. Well, I've got an instance that isn't abstract. It's a real world situation where one of the entities in the Auckland Council, I'm not going to say which one, had a budget for an initial project of 1.8 million last year. As a consequence of number of shortcomings in my view that characterise this project, that increased to 2.25 million in a relatively short space of time. And then just recently, the latest spending of additional 3.45 million on top of that to do with this particular project. Now, in my view, that is an entirely discretionary and unneeded, unwanted spend. Now, I don't know where else that type of decision has been made within this organisation, but I know for a fact that that is taking place right here and now. So if that's magnified out across the COs and different divisions of council, that could amount to quite a significant amount of discretionary spend that at the very least should be reminded to be scrutinised, and where possible, consider stopping. Where possible is an important qualifier there. I would imagine if it's any of the highly valued community spending, and I don't include personnel or staff costs in that's contractual, that's not discretionary. If people are on contracts in this organisation, you can't just remove people. So the instance that I'm aware of definitely fits that bill there. And I want that stopped and subject to the encouragement that we've so boldly put up here in our resolution. And I would just say by conclusion, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Williamson from November of last year has consistently asked for all the information that goes to budgets around here, so that that very definition of what may or may not be discretionary could be brought to us to make a judgment on. That has consistently not happened, and I would suspect part of the frustration today is to do with that ongoing refusal to make that sort of information that we need to make informed choices. I don't hear anyone saying anything about that. Or is it just accept everything as gospel? Well, I think this resolution goes some way to finally trying to bring this matter to a head. Otherwise, what are we doing here? We have no control, we have no direction, and you just end up taking what's put in front of you. Well, B tells us these are changed times and we can't continue to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to make a comment. I don't have any questions, but you're allowing comments, so I'm going to go with it. I wanted to acknowledge Councillor Williamson because you've always raised expenditure, always, and I respect that. But in this instance, I won't be supporting this. I think the use of the word encourage is just really trying to tell people what to do in an environment where people already know it's hard. They already know money is tight. They already know they could lose their jobs. Our community groups already know not to apply for funding because we don't have any money for them. So their projects are in jeopardy. People already know it's tough. They don't need another reminder or to be encouraged like this in this way. I also think it goes against the tenets of shared governance that we have with local boards. This is us trying to tell them what to do, and I've never been a supporter of top-down kind of statements like that. I think this also plants the seed of attacking the credibility of those that make the decisions that are listed in C. And I don't think that's a good way to run our business of council. I think there's too much ambiguity here, and where there is too much ambiguity, to me, it leads to irresponsible decision making. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
It's supposed to be questions, but thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was actually going to put some comments in the sidebar, but I'm reminded that the protocols are that we're not to use the sidebar for debate. Your Worship, I have a question, and it's of you, but I want to put it in the context of an apology for feeling a bit emotional about this. I'm sitting in my kitchen, I can't be with you. I'm listening to Eden Park, where the waiatas are flowing through my window of what's going on with the kapahaka, and it's making me quite emotional. So apologies for this.
it was suggested that we might be overthinking this, but I actually think we're verging on becoming petty. The assumption behind this for me is that it's where we won't jeopardise in terms of health and safety. And to you, Your Worship, can you think of a pathway forward? I really hate the fact that at a time where people have been through so much, we are being so petty today, where in actual fact I see us all pretty well in agreement. Could you please find some wording that qualifies that sufficiently, that deals with health and safety, but gives a sense of leadership and direction and good governance in moving forward? And I would really like you to comment on that, whether or not there could be a qualification there that will meet everyone's objectives. Thank you.
Well, I think this is a fairly benign but encouraging statement. And people who are going to vote against it are voting against noting their situation. They're voting against encouraging the people to be sensible. And they're voting against the staff to report back the impacts and defining these things. They're entirely sensible things. So if you're going to vote against this, think about how that might be seen. You may or may not have some better words for this, but this is a sensible series of things which people have come up with and has been proposed and seconded. And so if I could find better words for it, I would. We have heard the debate which wanders between people who want to thunder out and be harder on this one and other people who don't want to do anything about it. If we can't work out what discretionary over the next month with having asked staff to come back to it, then you wonder why we have spending limits within people's staff positions. Staff are allowed to spend up to a certain amount at their discretion, and then above that a limit goes to something else. So that we're just right through the way we run here. So this is simply asking that the governing body note our position, and we note everything. We note a presentation from FAO. We note that the sun rises in the east. We encourage those people to closely scrutinise and consider. And we request staff to point out, I'm looking forward to number C, so we might get some guidance of what discretionary is. And it is not discretionary that they clean up the rubbish on the side of the road. You do that. And I mean, it's nitpicking. So I'm hoping I've answered your question there, but if I was you, I'd listen to the Matatini. It's probably better than this.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Sayers.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I think you've just said what I was going to say, Your Worship. As what I was angling for a little bit earlier in the debate, just reinforcing your comments there, they're bang on the mark. This is a reinforcement through to particularly the way I see it, to the directors of the CCOs. The board of directors need to be directed by the governing body that discretionary expenditure must be controlled, and this is simply putting in writing. So I fully endorse it, and I thank you for your hot helicopter comments around it, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hills has got another crack at the...
Mine was just a question, and there has been debating points. Thank you, Mayor. I won't be supporting this mainly because there is no definition, and I've heard from people that A, this has no teeth, and B, this sends a message. If you don't think the staff and the management and the organisation knows there is a spending freeze on and a staff recruitment freeze on, and they've been pulling back spending since 2020, then you really haven't been talking to staff or checking in on departments. These statements might make us feel good and we can beat our chest, etc. But the staff know this. The budget says this. I mean, if you think about what discretionary spending is, in the budget, we're up for cutting homelessness spend, cutting the arts and cultures programming, education services, regional events, local events, half the local board discretionary funding if they don't use their ABS funding, outdoor experiences, funding for homelessness, regional coordination of community-focused initiatives, climate change, action-related behavioural change, there's, we did talk about the Healthy Waters funding that was discretionary, and we realised we needed that, so that's thankfully not up for a cut now. And I did speak to Parole over the last few weeks because of the huge amount of waste we removed for free, because it was the right thing to do for a health and safety issue, but that was discretionary spending. That was unbudgeted spend, well over $1 million, removing 2,700 tonnes of waste, flood waste for our communities. Opening the 27 shelters and CDCs was discretionary funding, nothing we budgeted for. The 2,000 staff who volunteered, worked overnight. Many of us have been at our CDCs and shelters and seeing leisure staff, young people, people from all through parts of the organisation who probably aren't recording the toil they did. They probably aren't asking for the hours back because they were all doing it for Aucklanders. And we know morale is pretty low. It's been a tough 3 years, and we know that staff are not spending on issues. Tātaki Auckland Unlimited have gone from a $27 million cut to a $44 million cut. They are talking to me weekly on the different things that are going to go and that we're no longer going to do as a city, including economic development, major events, things like that our city. So to turn around and just go, hey, council, please stop spending frivolously, I think is a bit of a slap in the face. So I've heard, my main reason also is that I've heard from both that this doesn't mean anything and it's really meaningful. So, which means that we don't have a report on it. It couldn't be figured out at the Expenditure Control and Procurement Committee last week. So clearly it is nothing more than a waste of time compared to all the other stuff we're supposed to be doing on this agenda today.
Okay, well, we'll stop talking about it and get on with it if that's okay. Karen Leone, no, anybody else? No, I'll put the vote. All those in favour?
Call for a division.
Pardon?
Yeah, division. Councillors, you're voting on the amendment as we have just had under discussion. Councillor Baker. Councillor Bartley.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Ferry.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Foley.
Against.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
No, thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone.
Against.
Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
For.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson. Councillor Williamson.
For.
Mayor Brown. So that is carried 11 votes to 9.
I think we've just about finished the report from the Chief Executive and the Finance.
Are we able to comment on the actual report now?
Yeah. So we've got a substantive, comprehensive thing with regard to the Chief Executive and the financial report. Okay, as if you can remember where we were, Councillor Lee and followed by Councillor Walker were waiting to speak on the report from the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer. So, Councillor Lee.
I've already spoken,
okay.
Mr Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Walker. Thank you very much. Comments? Councillor Fully had a comment. And Councillor Hills has on the substantive.
Yep.
You. Fully, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I've already asked enough questions and others have asked the questions that I wanted to ask, but I did want to just make special mention of our staff who've been working really hard in response to the flood and the cyclone, and a really special mention for Tava, who's been incredible, and Moya and Saga in our catering team as well. Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge the council, everyone involved with the emergency response. I think it's a marked difference from what we saw with the initial flooding. When it flooded, we didn't have any evacuation sites that we knew of to let people know where to go when they were able to get out of their flooded home. Whereas this time round, there were evacuation sites already set up, and it just felt better coordinated. It felt like we could be safe with whatever hit us in the cyclone. So I really do want to acknowledge everybody, our civil defence and Paul Amaral. He kept saying to me that it's about getting Auckland back to normal and keeping the people first, because some of our shelters are having to stay open as families have nowhere to go. So I want to acknowledge those statements from him and what Civil Defence have been doing, and the fact that a lot of it is also our own council staff, not exactly a Civil Defence team, but our own staff that are taking up those roles and staffing the evacuation centres and the food and the building inspections and the rubbish clearance and the animal welfare and the 0800 number and taking those calls. I reckon they've shown how outstanding Auckland Council is, even though we get a lot of crap. But boy, this response has really stood out in all aspects. So I really do praise Auckland Council, the CCOs, just everybody that did something. I don't want to name too many names. Whenever there was anything wrong with what we were seeing, I was straight emailing Phil Wilson, Mace, Jim Stabbick, Claudia, what Eddie's doing, Craig McElroy and his team, because we had so many residents scared about the drains flooding. So we would email him addresses and the contractors would get out there and clear the drains. Parole and what she did with the rubbish, just everybody. I hope everyone knows I'm acknowledging everything they've done, and of course Craig Hobbs and our building inspection team. So just real big thank you to everybody that's done something, and our own councillors and our local boards. We've all been out there on the front line doing whatever we can to support. So I reckon we should just take a step back and just look at everything that we're doing for our city and just be proud of what we're doing, given, what we're going through financially. But I think this is a time to just be proud of us as Auckland Council.
Councillor Walker, please.
Just a point of clarification or order, and it just goes to the vote we've just had and conceivably the vote that we're considering now. My understanding is that in meetings, people have to acknowledge that they're part of that meeting initially or give an apology. And if they are participating remotely, that actually has to be determined by the meeting. That's my understanding. And my understanding is that that certainly covered off Councillor Fletcher and I think Councillor Sayers, but Councillor Filipina I thought not. Now I may be mistaken there, I just seek some clarification on that. Thank you. I'm sure it's in the minutes already if that's the case.
I think it's all covered, but thanks very much. Councillor Turner.
It's all right, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Leone.
Yep.
Okay, I also just want to, following on from what Councillor Bartley has just said, I'm really proud of the way that Auckland Council has responded to the cyclone. And I just want to specifically acknowledge the fact that when our committee did meet and make the recommendations for the changes the second time round, that the council, responded really quickly to those changes to have the 21 CDCs stand up. And yeah, just overall a really amazing job, and thank you to our communities. We know that they were definitely the backbone of all the support that was needed out there. So just acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it did go better next time, but we did have warning. Now, I think we've reached the end of that. We could now... You sure? No, we've just got rid of those. Yeah, no, Councillor Turner's done. He's done. I'm getting too much help here.
Was there an answer to what Councillor Walker raised about Councillor Filipaina's vote?
No, it's okay. It's sorted.
Oh, yeah.
Righto. We now go back to the substantial, to the recommendation about the Chief Executive's report. Can you find that?
Councillors, can I just clarify that the electronic attendance is in order for all 4 councillors?
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you for that.
The one in front of you has been moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor that we note all of the reports, and thank you for having those reports. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary?
Against? Against BCD, Filipaina?
Okay, we'll note you. I could say that's carried there. All right, thanks very much. We'll go to the next. The approval of Auckland Council's submission to the draft report of the Future of Local Government Review Panel. Now, who's Denise O'Shaughnessy, are you risking? Come forward, please.
Kia koutou. This submission on the agenda is written in response to the draft report of the Future for Local Government Review Panel, in response to their call for submissions. It's therefore written with the review panel as the main or only audience. Following the workshop on the 8th of February, a draft submission was circulated to all elected members for feedback. Feedback included concern that there were a number of recommendations Council didn't land a position on in that submission. There was support for the views on the need for a range of participatory and deliberative engagement practices to ensure meaningful engagement with communities. Some of the feedback was that there was no opposition or general support for a 4-year term at the workshop, and Council could therefore support that. And there was a range of contextual feedback. For example, recognising Mātou Waka and Council's engagement with Māori and a number of other points. On this basis, we've made a range of adjustments to the submission that's before you today, and these fall into three broad groups. So a group where the amendment reflects the status quo. For example, Council already has a program in place to build staff capability in Te Ao Māori. Our current elected member program is not mandatory, so we've opposed that recommendation. There's another group where there would be no reason not to support the recommendation, so that includes a remuneration review and a digital transformation roadmap for local government. And then finally, support for a 4-year electoral term. There didn't appear to be opposition to this, and it's consistent with Council's support for a 2019 LGNZ remit, which was conditional on any change being determined by referendum and paralleled by central government change. Following the direction of this meeting, we'll finalise a submission and seek approval from the delegated approvers up there in recommendation B before lodging that with the review panel by the 28th of February. Local board views will be appended to the submission as is usual practice, and all local boards have provided feedback. I haven't seen all of it, but they have all provided feedback. 6 local boards met the deadline to have their feedback and comments incorporated in the submission. Thank you.
Be finished, councillor? I mean, not councillor.
Yes, thank you.
Staff member, sorry. Well, I'll have a mover and a seconder for seeking approval for this before I take precedent.
Second.
Okay, now questions from Councillor Watson for openness.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just seeking clarification on one of our responses in our submission as it goes to lower the eligible voting age. I think this is on page 31, and the comment there is that we neither support or approve. That's what's down there, but we did have a council meeting, committee of the whole, Councillor Hill's committee, where we did actually establish a position and that was not to support the lowering of the age. So I'm just wondering if that's an anomaly or how that has transpired.
Through the chair, the recommendation position there was on the basis of the workshop. That's true. There was a vote, as I understand it, at the PEP committee on that. That is it's a political decision, obviously. The one way to think about this process is it's thinking about the long term, 30 years out, what the future might look like. But that's true. There was a vote at the PEP committee.
So, Mr. Mayor, so all I would seek then is that is altered, that we do not support it, because that was the position that we took at that committee of the whole.
Correct.
Okay, well that was, I actually was out of the room when that happened. Was there, the vote was taken to oppose that, was it? Okay, well you've got to reflect that, I'm afraid. And then further questions, Councillor Newman.
Yeah, well, actually, it's been addressed in part now, Chair. So the yeah, on page 30 of the submission, I mean, you'll be very clear on single transferable vote, do not support. But now, as a result of that resolution at that committee of the whole at 16B, lower the eligible voting age in local government elections to the age of 16. Now there has been a clear resolution, do not support, that the submission will be amended to reflect that.
Through the chair, I'll take the direction of this committee.
Well, direction's already been confirmed by a resolution of the committee of the whole.
Apparently it was voted for, so you've got to follow that. Councillor Hills has got a question.
Oh, it's just to clarify, and you may need another resolution, because the resolution to support it was lost as opposed to a resolution to officially oppose it. So I think that's the issue probably for the staff, is that we, you know, you could take that assumption that by voting against supporting it, you should oppose it.
Richard, I'm sorry. I think that the intent of the committee of the whole is clear. You tested it and you lost. So the position of the committee of the whole is do not support, and that's what the submission needs to reflect.
I was not relitigating. I 100% know that. I was just saying that there isn't an official.
Well, I think that that should say that it does not support.
Can I just clarify for councillors that the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee, Councillor Hills is quite correct. The amendment that he put forward was lost. There was no other resolution passed in terms of this matter. Therefore, there is nothing for Denise to put into the submission, whether it's for or against, because it wasn't clear.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Can I speak to that? I've got the wording of the resolution here. So the resolution said we support the lowering of the voting age for local government elections to 16 years and advocate for this in the submission to the Justice Committee. That motion was lost. So if that motion was lost, that was not support. That was not. That is quite something different to say we neither support or approve. That was put up. It was lost. That means the council doesn't support it. It does not reflect we neither approve or don't. That's not an accurate description of what happened at that meeting. There was a full debate. The vote was taken. That was lost.
Clarification?
Warwick to comment in a minute, but it seems to me that I wasn't here, but if the vote was that we don't support it, we don't support it. But carry on, Warwick. What do you tell me what I'm told?
I just thought I should add that as a result of the outcome of that resolution, the submission that was finally sent to the Justice Committee contains the statement that the council does not support the lowering of the voting age. That was based on the comments of the chair at the time in reflection on the outcome of the voting.
That's correct. We don't oppose it, but we do not support it. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, well, I just thought the meeting should know that there has been a submission now made which says plainly that the council does not support the lowering of the voting age.
Through the chair, can I look? We'll sort the wording out. It would be different from what we have now, which is neither support or oppose, and we will make it consistent with the submission that Warwick is talking to. So you have my word on that. If you want to do a resolution, fine, but there's really no point. Yeah.
I'll accept that. That's good enough. Councillor Walker, are you going to speak?
At the meeting, I raised with Warwick that the wording in the attachment for our submission was opposed. That was what was in the agenda. And that is a matter of record. And I brought that to the attention of the officer who agreed. So the further change was actually subsequent to that. So I have some concern around the advice that we're receiving around this issue because I'm very clear on it. And I'm on record in that respect. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to have a submission which says we do not support that, and that seems fair enough. That was what they said. I wasn't there. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to see somewhere in here, but I'm not exactly sure where, that the council want more say on local infrastructure. At the moment, we feel the government's role is to pay for these, but we would like more say. Is that possible in there somewhere in there, or does anyone disagree with that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can work that into the executive summary and also to some other sections in the submission which talk about funding of infrastructure.
Well, I think you've done pretty well getting through that contentious thing and getting to the stage you've got, so well done. So we have a mover and a seconder for accepting that and lodging it. And further comment? Mr. Hills, have you got a further comment here? Right. I thought you had. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Carried. Well done. Difficult situation. I know that you had to fight your way through. Item 9 is our council submission on the Water Services legislation and Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill, otherwise known as 3 Waters, I believe.
Kia ora koutou, through the chair. Good afternoon. I don't have a presentation. We had a workshop with you on this a week or so ago, so I thought I would just very briefly introduce it and then happy to answer questions. I've got colleagues in the room as well, if it goes into detail. But just a reminder, these are the second and third bills on the Three Waters reform. The first bill was passed at the end of last year. These two were presented to Parliament and kind of popped out the end for submissions just on Christmas time. So we've only really had a couple of months to work on this. We have effectively focused on 6 particular themes. Overall, consistent with the Council's positions over the last few years, the Council opposes the reforms. There are elements that we support, but overall oppose the reform, and particularly the way in which the reform is going about what it's seeking to achieve. The 6 elements in particular that we're focusing on in this, again, are consistent with the positions held in the last Council. Firstly, around the separation of stormwater functions to Council's planning and land use functions, opposing that. The second theme is around accountability, so that's the governance arrangements and Council's lack of involvement or control in these new entities. Land assets and transfers, one that's slightly different, but opposing any transfer of open space assets, Council's open space assets, into the new entities. Funding and financing, continuing the position there around it is unclear what the implications are on Council's finances and balance sheet as a result of the Three Waters reform and what will happen and when it will happen when debt is removed, etc. So there's still some real lack of clarity there. Economic regulation, there is support for economic regulation, particularly of 2 waters, potable water and wastewater. Unclear as to how that will work for stormwater, so that's the real question there. And then the 6th and last kind of theme is the transition between now and July 2024, and then economic regulation coming in 2027, and some real concerns about how that's going to work. Mr. Chair, I will leave it there and happy to answer questions.
Just before questions, I'll get a mover and a second of this. I'm happy to move this, and the Deputy Mayor will second that. Questions now. Anyone want a question? Councillor Walker.
My question just goes a little beyond this, and it goes to the position that Council is going to take, given the magnitude of this. And as we know, this dismembers the Council in respect of taking a great deal of our responsibility around water away from us. And I would suggest that there is huge community opposition to this. There are other councils around New Zealand that have taken, I would suggest, a much stronger position than we have. So the issue that I would raise, Mr. Mayor, and I've raised this before, is around whether this council will embark on a more aggressive campaign, which might involve promoting our stance more aggressively to the media and encouraging the public and various organisations to get behind us, to associate more assertively with other councils, like Christchurch and others, that are taking a stronger position than us. And given that this is very much a politically driven issue, and this is election year, a more assertive and aggressive stance on our part is timely. So that is a question that I'm just asking. It goes beyond A, B and C, but it's important. Thank you.
You're asking me to answer that? Where are the staff when I need them? We have it. Our submission does say we oppose this. My main submission is that it won't work alongside other things. I have had discussions with the Prime Minister, and he's well aware that my view is that they've been able to, no one's been able to explain how the service delivery of water in Auckland will be improved by having 40 irrigation schemes from Northland added. and nor have they been able to explain how 40 largely irrigation-based northern ones will be better by being managed out of here, whose skill sets are about domestic supply. There is no answer to that. The government is the government. They have a majority. They can pass what they like, and they've passed this. And so we've made our statement. We have to live with the government. I'm very much a trader. They've made our opposition known to them on the stage, but on the other hand, there's a whole lot of other things we want to have a good relationship with over as well. So they're quite clear that we oppose it. If anyone wants to march in the street about it and take it further, well, I'll take advice. But we've formally stated quite strongly at the front of this that we oppose it, and we've got a lot of reasons for it. And you have to have faith in the fact that it goes before House committees, and we are doing at this stage here what we are required to do as a submission. If you want to raise other things about that, then that's beyond this particular requirement that staff have produced a submission which does represent what they've heard from around the council table. So you'll have to lead it yourself, and then I'll follow if you want to. But I just think strategically at the moment we're playing quite a good game in the middle, and we have opposed it formally. Is that right? Those of you who wish to stand for the government at the end of the year, it's only cost $200 and you can form a party and have a crack, but I'm not interested in that. Councillor Newman, you're prepared to stand for Parliament, or just ask a question?
Megan, I have a question. I got a question with respect to: have you received any further advice from officials following on from the flood in relation to this quandary, this jurisdiction of the stormwater assets in the road corridor versus the stormwater assets that connect to and from that road corridor, which would sit with this new water entity? The bill was a dog on this matter before the floods, and I would imagine that the floods have clarified the extent to which this is now unworkable. Can you clarify?
I've had no specific conversation with any officials, certainly in DIA or government, around that particular issue. It's clear, though, around this table, and certainly from most staff's views, that the floods have shown that it is hard enough now, and it will be, I'm not sure if impossible is the right word, but very, very difficult if it's separated. The other separation, of course, that is proposed in the bill at the moment is urban stormwater and rural. So councils will keep rural, but not urban. That doesn't make sense either, obviously. So I completely take your point. We've tried to put that in the submission. We can have another look to make sure that's strong enough, and we'll continue to work with the officials on that over the coming months too.
Thank you for that. I think you'll find that under the current definition that the entire Wairau Valley is now going to be taken over by Three Waters because it's clearly a stormwater asset. I don't think that's what they had in mind, actually. I should imagine there's a lot of nervous thinking about parts of this. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister and we did discuss that water delivery and sewerage was possible to separate, but he'd have a lot of trouble with stormwater, and that was before the stormwater assets include the entire grape growing area of Hawke's Bay. Councillor Turner.
Mr Mayor, just in some of my talking in water care in my lead councillor role, some of the conversation talked about the hiatus of activity on the ground which happened between the changeover from council to water care as it is now, and I'm just very concerned about this making a hiatus in activity on the ground, this changeover, especially now in respect to what we've experienced with the floods. The last thing we want right now is any hold-ups in progressing with maintaining and improving our stormwater.
Very good point. Okay, there are no further questions. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Well done. I'm going to propose a half-hour break for lunch. unanimously by the committee held by Daniel the other day. So I'm moving a seconder for this. Newman Lee. Daniel Newman to introduce this. I don't know if we need to have it go on too long about this one, or at least I'd rather hope not. But then again, I have been shown to be completely wrong about anticipating what happens in the past. Daniel Newman, try and do the short version, please, if it's possible.
Thank you. You say that to me so often. There are two amendments that I would hope that can be accepted without too much debate, and I do want to acknowledge the presence of Alistair and Chris, who are here to speak to this matter. The review of the policy is the work of the committee, but there are two areas within the context of this review that will need support from the governing body in terms of amending the terms of reference. The first relates to the frequency of committee meetings. The frequency of committee meetings is required because we cannot address the matters solely on the basis of a quarterly meeting schedule. The provision of monthly meetings will better assist the committee to expedite important work streams. The second matter relates to the ports of Auckland. The Mayor wrote to me and to the committee in December regarding his desire for us to address matters pertaining to the process for the selection and the appointment of the directors of the ports. A legacy, colleagues, of the disbandment of ACIL was the need to establish the Ports of Auckland Limited Appointment Panel, or POLAP, which is a hybrid process for the appointment of directors via an electoral college comprising the Mayor, the Chair of the Port, and the Chief Executive of Auckland Council. That process is at variance with the policy for the recruitment and the appointment of directors for substantive CCOs. The variation to the delegation today would in effect poleaxe POLAP, and the recruitment of directors would be led through a process codified in the Council's policy, noting that we are the sole shareholder of the port. I support that amendment. Finally, the consequence of this review is that there is a need for the Council to write to their shareholding minister, to the Minister of Transport. This relates to Part 1 of the Port Companies Act, and the Minister's agreement is required with respect to amending the Constitution of the Ports. I support that amendment. So thank you, Your Worship, and I note the officers are present to answer questions.
Anything to that? No? Okay, that's very good to hear. Just to respond to questions. There are currently no questions. This must be infinitely clear, in which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, carried. How wonderful. That's a new record. So encouraged, I'm going to move to item 12, the referred from the Audit and Risk Committee, the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report. Who's going to address us on this one here? Pardon? Paul Robertson. Oh, there you are. Paul Robertson, welcome.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, everybody. So this is a standard report provided to the Audit and Risk Committee at each meeting. I referred to you to help you discharge your obligations under the Health Safety at Work Act as officers of the PCBU. I'll take the report as read, but do highlight 2 points of interest for the governing body. The first of which is a continued experience of violence and aggression experienced by staff and contractors. We did have a recent event where a contractor was violently assaulted and stabbed over a relatively minor matter. It was unprovoked. They have recovered, but it does show an escalation of violence and aggression experienced by staff. This is not something that we have seen before, and not something that the contractor had seen before. So this is new for us, and we're continuing to monitor the situation, but it does sort of highlight the risk that our people face out in the community. The second point worth highlighting is we recently replaced our risk management system, incident reporting system. And through doing that, we've continued to see a heightened level of incident reporting, which is great. One of the implications of the change of system has been a bias towards learning and improving, at which point we have a lot more corrective actions that we are generating as a result of investigations. We have experienced, as this is a relatively new aspect of the system, that we're now seeing an increase in overdue actions. We're continuing to monitor that and work with leadership to address those so that we are improving on those things that we've learned post-incident. Really, that's all I wanted to highlight as part of my report, and happy to take any questions.
Councillor Watson.
Your report refers us back to the audit and risk, and there's a connect link there, a section that called wellbeing, and there was just something there I wanted to ask you about in respect of this provision of pastoral care into high-risk teams. A pilot has been completed utilising an external resource, so I'm just curious to know what that pilot was and what the resource was, which resulted in identification of several personal wellbeing concerns. So what are those concerns in a proactive response? And then permanent pastoral care roles will be established over the next quarter. So that was all very general. I couldn't decipher what it meant. I tried to find in the report. So could you tell me if you know what that section 11 from the audit and risk meant in terms of the wellbeing?
Great, and thanks for the question. And through the chair. So pastoral care is a provision of specific support for a person's pastoral needs, so their mental health, their personal well-being. It's different to what we might do as an organisation for wellbeing support more generally, or what a team might do. It's very focused on individual needs and the identification and management of those as soon as possible after they've been identified. This helps people to be more productive and effective while they're at work, but also prevents any negative impact on their health and well-being from being at work. So what we have been doing is looking at the provision of pastoral care, which was a recommendation from the Hawara report that was done in 2021, highlighted this as a need for the organisation. We've piloted it within regulatory services, particularly within an animal management team. And we've been through that, we've identified that certain people had well-being concerns or personal health issues or elements that were affecting their work, but were related to personal issues, and we've been able to help them identify those and work through those and provide support and referral to their GPs or to other agencies that might be better placed to support them. And the establishment of those roles is to recognise that it had a significant impact on the well-being of that team, and to then start to utilise that learning across more high-risk areas across the council.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Mayor. So how many permanent pastoral care roles have been established then? And I'm just assuming from what you've said there that those roles are just specific to, in this case, was it the regulatory or the dog rangers and people, or is it more general than that? So the permanent roles, and they're confined to a part of the organisation with a view to perhaps expanding them to other parts. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We trialled this within animal management because we identified some initial needs with the team. The permanent roles, we're looking at 3 roles, which would be funded through existing FTE numbers that we have, and we would be using those across other areas outside of animal management. So it would be an expanded service that we're able to deliver now.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the robust conversation we had at Audit and Risk. I'm going to ask here a question that I asked there, just so that all members are across it. Obviously, as we've discussed several times already in this meeting, we've had literally thousands of staff out there doing things that are not part of their normal day jobs in an emergency situation. Some of those people have been acting well outside their roles in quite heroic circumstances. And so what are we doing as an organisation to support them to transition back to their day jobs, but also to deal with any trauma that they may have experienced from the, being first responders and helping other people who are in trauma, that kind of thing? also some of them may have experienced directly themselves for their own homes. So what are we doing in that space, please?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, there was a significant amount of work applied to ensuring that we had welfare teams or wellbeing teams out amongst our workers while they were in the field, to ensure that if people were exposed to a high level of emotional trauma, to identify elements of what we would call compassion fatigue, where people were experiencing a carryover into their own personal health. To identify that early and to ensure that we manage that at the point of discovery rather than waiting for it to become an issue. We've also been providing a significant amount of work to provide some coaching for people leaders who might need it. So we've been running sessions for people leaders across the organisation to drop in and get coaching on wellbeing issues that their teams might be facing as they transition back to BAU. But while we were doing that, we continued to have pastoral care and welfare checks across all of our AEM civil defence responses. They were at each civil defence shelter and at hub as well.
Oh, Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. I see that we're probably because the incidents are going up so quickly, but we're heading to about 43% of the actions not acted on, well above the target. How are we going to get on top of that? Is it a people issue or a budget issue, or it's just a time issue?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, what we're discovering is as we're really relying on this action orientation towards our investigation outcomes more heavily now with this new system. It's enabling a lot more allocation of action. What we're experiencing is that there's a date entered for an action which may not have been discussed or agreed with undertaking the action. So we're discovering some of that, which we will coach people and provide some guidance on how to address those actions. In other areas, it's a case of not being familiar with the system and understanding that they have outstanding actions to complete. So we're working through, it's a degree of coaching and development support as part of our implementation plan.
Thank you. And Mayor, just one more question. And it might be hard for maybe your team to see, but is there any way of knowing, I know there's a lot of pressure under staff right now, and with staff losing jobs and things like that, is there an ability, or do you think there's a risk that people won't report things or people won't ask for help? Are you ramping up the kind of anonymous ways to report or confidential ways to report things if people are feeling like they maybe don't want to jump into that space right now?
Yes, is the short answer to that. So we are ensuring that our speak up channels are active and available for all staff. We're reminding people of that at every opportunity, as well as our in-step provision. I don't have any details of the current utilisation of our EAP uptake. However, we aren't seeing, we're not aware of any issues such as that at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Philip Heine, please.
Tēnā koe te rangatire koro matua, Mayor. Just want to acknowledge you, and also councillors who are there. My apologies about not having the camera on, but if I do, it's going to be black anyway, so I won't put that on. Just to our rangatire there, my pātai, I've read the report dated 20th of February. So my question is, do you also have a channel or for those that get social media, email, get attacked? Do we have an option under this report with the audit at risk that you have an ability for that those staff to be also have anonymously? Because we had some suicides. I was lucky enough, I think, from my perspective, to talk to one of them in regards to the issues she was having, and the information she gave me concerned me. But I know that when it happened in regards to her, do you have a mechanism, an avenue for those that end up getting attacked, social media and everything else, for them to go?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, we do have a number of avenues that staff can utilise to report on something like that. So we do have our in-step EAP provider who can provide support and care for that individual in the moment and after that type of event. So that addresses any potential concerns around their ongoing health. We do have the external channels available for Speak Up, where they can disclose that something's happened, that it may not be something that they feel confident to disclose internally. But we do also have the ability to report that type of incident utilising our online information systems. The challenge with the online information system I mentioned before, the incident reporting system, is it's not confidential in that you can't, sorry, it's not anonymous. It's confidential, it's not anonymous. So people entering incidents, their details might be seen by the health and safety team. We would then try to manage that. It's just we do have to be careful about providing a reporting tool that we can't then do anything about because we don't know who to talk to. So we have a number of avenues that we can provide to staff.
Good. Your Worship, just two more quick questions. One, is there an avenue for elected members as well to utilise, which I should have in hindsight, when the information comes to me? That's number one. The last question is, have we had an increase from your perspective around incidents like what I have described happened since you've been in your role?
So on the first question, elected members are able to utilise those channels. So Speak Up, the EAP provisions that we have through InStep, as well as the Done Safe reporting tool. All of these are accessible to all councillors and elected members. On the second point, I seem to have lost the sound there. We haven't seen an increase in the type of activity you're specifically referring to. What we have seen is an increase in reporting around violence and aggression, but that's not the same issue. So I'm not aware of a increase in that type of incident. No.
Kia ora. Thank you, Worship. Kia ora.
No more questions. I've got a little one. Do you have a list of preferred psychiatrists, chiropractors, fixers and general people for people to deal with? I mean, I had suffered an incident where I thought I was strong enough to pick up a 40-kilogram box of food, or rather catch it thrown at me, which I wasn't. I had some trouble working out where I could go, actually. So
Auckland Council is an accredited employer under the ACC Accredited Employer Program. So for staff, we utilise a provider called WellNZ who has a list of preferred suppliers. As elected members, not being employees of the PCBU, ACC would cover any claims associated with an elected member and would have a list of preferred suppliers. It would be an ACC accredited provider.
thanks. Anyhow, that seems that. We've had a mover and a seconder. Can we? No, we need a mover and a seconder. Two fine ladies. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you very much. Now, this one's procedurally fraught with difficulty. We are going to have the Tafau project, which we will have a certain amount of debate for, and then we'll have to go, and then later on there is a confidential section about this. So at this stage here, the purpose of this report is just to seek a decision, but in fact come forward and explain, drag us through the tricky parts here, because in fact Okay, so this is not actually making the decision of which of the options. This is introducing the options. So it's been moved and seconded, but now we'll have you to address us at this stage. This is just the open part, so if you've got any raging debates about this, just hang on until we go into the bit later on, but thank you, Claudia.
So kia ora koutou katoa. So I will be very brief as this is the open session. So this paper summarises some of the key items that will be presented in the confidential section. We're proposing to just simply mark this paper as read and to hold any debate until we get to the confidential section, which will have more of the material items. The reason why this is confidential is to protect the probity of any process and to allow us to then proceed with the recommended options as our elected members suggest in the next section, and protect any commercial sensitivities as part of that process. Thank you.
Okay, well, there's no questions at this stage. I'll just move that. All those in favour of the contrary, carried. Thank you very much. We'll see you later on, no doubt. Item 13 is a summary of governing body and committee information, which is just a list of stuff. Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Aye. Bingo. There's no extraordinary items that have come to my attention, in which case I'll have a mover and a seconder to go into confidential, please. Mayor and Leone, Deputy Mayor and Leone. Right. All in favour, please say aye. Contrary. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are not elected officials or members of staff associated pertaining to this particular item, but very nice to see you